Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm going to be joined by Brian Batko. We're good as we approach the final day of the Steelers in Latrobe for training camp. We got to ask the question that I think hasn't been answered. What's been going on with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields? Because Russell Wilson is supposedly QB1, but he hasn't run like we've seen normal QB1s all throughout training camp. We'll get to that and a lot more here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by one of our great Steelers beat writers here at the Post-Gazette, Brian Batko. And as always, we are brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the number one bar in all of Pittsburgh, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those local beers are available on tap, 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. They've got outdoor seating, indoor seating. It's the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. We'll have more on them later. Brian, let's delve into a topic that we've kind of alluded to all throughout training camp, but it's the quarterback situation. And it's because I don't think we've seen the definitive moment yet where Russell Wilson is just QB1 that we've all been kind of expecting, or maybe it's just me. And the reason I bring this up as a lead topic, Brian, because in all my time of watching the Steelers, covering the Steelers, understanding what's going on in training camp, if there's a QB1, that guy is QB1 and he runs the first team offense, and the guys behind him kind of follow suit. Now, things got thrown up in the air a little bit because Russell Wilson got hurt before training camp, or in the conditioning test rather, and then Justin Fields was given the run of the first team for a bit. But we are now entering the final day of Latrobe training camp practice, and we have yet to see a single practice in training camp where Russell Wilson just runs the first team offense, and that's just that. Is that weird, Brian? Or am I just barking up the wrong tree? It's still Russell Wilson's offense. This will be fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a little bit weird, but for all we know, because of the calf, maybe at that point, Mike Tomlin and company just decided, you know what, Latrobe is going to be more or less a wash for Russ, and his preseason preparations will really get into full swing when we return to the South Side. That could be one school of thought, or maybe it is he doesn't have the status that Ben did by the end of his tenure, when he would practice a couple days, take a day off, let the backup handle all the reps. I still go back to that 2022 competition where Kenny Pickett was coming in, it's the 20th overall pick, first quarterback off the board, and yet Mitch Trubisky never had to rub elbows with the second teamers, let alone the third teamers that summer. I mean, I can't imagine that the Steelers' brain trust was more confident in Mitch off of a, basically a way out of the public eye year with Buffalo than they are right now with 35-year-old Russell Wilson. But maybe Mike Tomlin just learned a thing or two about how to work these quarterback situations from that year. Maybe it's a case of, hey, it behooves us to keep Justin confident, to keep him engaged, to keep him feeling like I'm not just an afterthought here behind the clear pole position guy. And then beyond all of that would be sort of the nuclear take, like you think of that meme with like the exploding brains, and this would be the one at the bottom, and it'd be like, no, the Steelers actually are going to rip up the whole plan, crumple it up into a little ball, toss it into a trash can, and start Justin Fields week 1 at quarterback.
I don't think that's happening. And look, I'm one of the first people to say, like, I think Justin Fields has done a solid job in camp, improving, being more consistent. I think that I think that, like, I know that there were two, quarterback, center exchange fumbles, but as far as the processing and the footwork and all the things that I wanted to see him do in the first preseason game, I thought he did that. And I think that he is trending upwards, but in my book, it's still Russell Wilson because he's done that for more than a decade in the NFL, and that's built his thing there. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at, Brian, is that I feel like, am I missing something? Is there something there? Or like you said, maybe the Steelers, this is them recognizing like, hey, you know what? I mean, and this could be Mike Tomlin too. Mike Tomlin inherited Ben Roethlisberger, and that's one of the things he's never had to worry. He never had to worry about who was his starting quarterback until it was the year they drafted Kenny Pickett and signed Mitch Trubisky. And so maybe those 2 years taught him something. You know what? I'm going to approach this differently. And maybe this is just that different approach, but this is also a completely different situation. Like you said, it baffles me that we haven't seen it. And maybe there's just this overt trust in Russ. Maybe there's a sense like, look, that we're going to plug this guy in and he's going to be fine and everything's going to work out great. And Russell Wilson doesn't need all these training camp looks, because I think the other thing, I think this is where if you're leaning more towards Justin Fields, this might be more about, let's see as much of Justin Fields as we can right now, before Russ is the number one guy. We don't see him for the whole season. And then that way we can have a more confident in our evaluation of Justin Fields when it's time to say, do we want to sign him for like a 2-year deal after this season to keep him around because we think that he can be QB1 or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good point too, Chris. And I think it goes hand in hand with something else that's been kind of just percolating in my brain over these last few weeks in Latrobe and watching this quarterback competition, if you want to call it that. I'm going to call it a quarterback situation. As this quarterback situation has played out for the Steelers, is when you think about not just week 1 in Atlanta, the first meaningful game you're going to play that's significant, could set the tone for the whole season, don't get me wrong, but it's also a long season, and it's a 17-game season. It's an 18-week season. I think as you try to come up with all the potential scenarios and hypotheticals that might present themselves to you over the course of the next few months, I think it would be a lot easier. It would make a lot more sense. It's a lot more logical to, if you have to eventually make the move from Russell Wilson to Justin Fields, than the other way around. I think if you, and I remember I was probably one of the people, and I think there were many people kind of saying that Kenny's rookie year was, it's probably a lot smoother for all involved if you go from Mitch to Kenny rather than throw the rookie out there to the Wolves from the start. And if he struggles, now you deal with, how do you massage benching the first round pick? And what if Mitch comes in and lights it up as a veteran? Now what do you do? Now you have a real mess on your hands. I think in this case, Justin Fields is not like franchise quarterback stature here, at least not yet. I mean, it's different because he's a cast off from the Bears and he's got 1 year under contract, and then we'll see what happens in Pittsburgh. But I just think with Russ coming in here, established as he is, having taken on the reins as the leader of this team, really since they signed him, bringing guys out to California to work out with him, Fields included, I think you give him that spot. Basically give him, I don't know that he's done much to earn it to this point, at least in a Steelers practice jersey, but you give him that spot. If it doesn't go well, you turn that page to Fields and suddenly there's a new jolt in your season. There's a young guy, there's hope for the future, there's optimism. And if the bottom falls out with him too, you go back to the grizzled vet again. I mean, it's getting way out into the future and building out, but I do think you need to consider just possibilities like that when you make the decision now. I mean, you flip it around the other way. If you start out with Fields and he struggles, man, that's going to be a huge blow to his confidence, I believe. And then you're going to Russ, and it's like, man, at that point, I feel like the 2024 season will feel like it's really off track at that point for the Steelers.
No, I feel you. And I think that's part of this, is trying to avoid that. And maybe there's a lot of calculations that you and I just aren't privy to or aren't considering right now that they're going into it. But I by and large, I know that there's some people out there like, you know what, the Steelers don't deserve, the blind trust to figure this out and to that they're going to do this the right way. But I think at the same time, I feel like if the whole idea here is that Russell Wilson's just going to be ready and he's going to be trusted to be ready, then it's still, we're just in a wait and see pattern. But I will say, if there's one thing I can evaluate on what I've seen out of the quarterbacks, It's that I do think Justin Fields has eliminated a lot of the problems that I saw in his game coming into Pittsburgh, or at least, hasn't shown them. I can't say that he's eliminated them, but if that's the one thing I got encouraging out of it, fine. Because at this point, I do feel like there is a much smaller drop off from what I expect to see out of Russell Wilson, and now what I think I will see out of Justin Fields.
Yeah, man, it's just it's kind of like with Russ. I mean, he does have the trust in everybody, I think, but you set yourself up for a win-win situation to some extent. Of if he comes in and doesn't miss a beat despite all the practice time that he didn't get out at St. Vincent College, then okay. I mean, that speaks for itself. You're probably going to be setting yourself up for a pretty good season. If Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph could get this team to 10 wins in the playoffs, then a solid to good Russell Wilson should elevate them even more. And if he doesn't have anything left in the tank, then you know what? It cost you nothing, vet minimum, unique situation there, and it's just in time. Justin Fields just in time to try to save the season. So it would put some pressure on him, but at the same time it wouldn't, because he'd be the backup and he'd be the guy who's getting his shot, and maybe with a shortened leash for the starter because of how good he looked in July and August.
Leave it to you to drop a pun right at the end of the segment. Can't believe you.
Bonk.
All right, we got to switch topics. When we come back, I want to talk about this rookie class, because I think that they are getting a little bit more of a chance than we normally see rookies in the Steelers. And is that an adjustment on the Steelers' part, or is that just how it's been? We'll talk about that and the secondary in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, I want to remind you, the show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they're right across the street from PNC Park. They're on Federal Street. You go to Mike's Beer Bar. They have they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap all day, every day. And they're always switching new ones in and out, so that you're always getting a new experience, a new selection every time you go in there. They also have over 20 televisions on the inside, so you can catch whatever sporting event that you want. You can it's also a great destination before, during, after Pirates games, whether home or away. Or you could also sit outside and enjoy sitting outside. It's been a lot cooler lately. It's been great to kind of sit outside. Maybe you want to enjoy.
I'm having a Latrobe beer in honor of our final trip out there for practice, and of course, Mike's has beers from Latrobe.
Yes, he does.
There, because of course he does. Like he's got everything. So.
If you don't know Mike travels all across Western Pennsylvania to find the best beers. When he hears there's a new one, he goes to it, tries out himself, and he says, "This is one of my customers I get." So why would you go anywhere else to enjoy the best beers of Western Pennsylvania? Go to Mike's Beer Bar today, and when you get there, tell him Chris and Brian sent you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian?
Yeah, go to Mike's Beer Bar. Tell them Brian sent you. And when they say who, then tell them Chris sent you. And then you will be treated like a king.
Totally. They do treat me very well over there. Thank you, Mike. We love you. But I want to delve into the rookies right now. Brian, our colleague Jerry, our guy here, we're hoping to have him on the Friday episode this week. He reported that Troy Fautanu has basically already won the right tackle position, that when he does return from his knee injury, that is a knee sprain that should hold him out for 1, maybe 2 preseason games, he will be the right tackle. And this will come down to the offensive line starters, will come down to at least a tackle, Broderick Jones versus Dan Moore Jr. Now, considering that, Brian, we've seen that there. I think we're all kind of expecting Zach Frazier to overtake Nate Herbig any day now, with how much he's been working with the first team in training camp, and how Nate Herbig had 2 bad quarterback center exchanges. And, you look at guys like Payton Wilson and even Beanie Bishop, who have been getting chances to work with the first team defense there. Is there a different philosophy in how rookies are being treated in the Steelers, or is this just a case of circumstance with the right guys fitting into the right situations?
Yeah, I think it's still case by case for the most part. I mean, starting with Troy Fautanu, I don't doubt Jerry's reporting there that they were really high on him, coming into the training camp, even going back to the draft, and that, you saw how quickly Mike Tomlin started to give him that elevated work, and it bared out in the preseason game too. I mean, they one series of Dan Moore, and they said, all right, let's flip the page to the first round pick. And then it didn't go so swimmingly. So from that standpoint, because of the rough tape that he put out there that you did a great job analyzing, Chris, especially with his footwork flipping from left tackle to right tackle. People should check that out on the Post-Gazette website, film review by Mr. Carter.
Yeah.
I feel like this is not going to be as cut and dried as it could have been coming into this. I mean, I was saying all along that, they have much more of a probable willingness to put him in there by week one, because it's not apples to apples with Broderick Jones last year. I mean, Broderick Jones was a 1-year full season starter at Georgia. Troy Fautanu has been doing this for a few years at Washington. He's a redshirt senior. He's an older guy. That was one of the pros for him in this 2024 draft class. More polished and more snaps in his career. I mean, he went all the way to the national championship game with the Huskies last year. So he's played a lot of ball. He's seen a lot. But a couple things complicate that for me. One, just moving him from left to right tackle. And two, now just this whole storm of, tough going in his first preseason action. And now the knee injury, the MCL, whatever it is. I mean, it's still not ideal to miss that second preseason opportunity. We'll see if he misses the third and final preseason opportunity as well. We've all heard the Tomlinism cliches about you can't box without sparring. They have a hardcore plan, but they're going to be light on their feet. And I just wonder if he's going to, toe tap his way to Dan Moore starting at left tackle again, because another thing Tomlin always says is he doesn't like to speculate about in stadium. And that's kind of exactly what you'd be doing unless Troy Fautanu goes out there P3 in Detroit and really looks the part against the Lions.
I think that's part of this too. Like you said, is seeing it, seeing is believing for Mike Tomlin. He wants to see you walk into that. He talks about stadium experience all the time. If Fautanu is not back for the final preseason game, that could be a big question for the Steelers as far as, is he ready for that? Especially, I thought Troy Fautanu did well against the run, but I mean, both sacks, he gave up pressure of guys that hit Justin Fields. And, I think that there's polishing that needs to be done there. And, we talked to Arthur Smith. By the way, you can see that full scrum video on the Post-Gazette's YouTube channel. So go subscribe to that to see all of our interviews that we put up there. I thought Arthur Smith, he spoke well of Troy Fautanu and what he did. And I think there's an acknowledgement like, hey, yes, some of those things, like he lost to Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter's a dude that's going to beat most people, especially in their first ever preseason start in the NFL. And Jerry Hughes, another very experienced guy. But, at the same time, like you're saying, you kind of want to see him. Like we've seen him stand up to TJ Watt in practice, but you need to see that in a game. And it's a game. The game environment is a very real thing. Stadium, crowd, noise, opponent that you ain't never played before. Those type of things count. And I think that's where Troy Fautanu is necessarily part of the equation. But we have seen other guys, even if you throw out Troy Fautanu, I think Zach Frazier is getting a look there. Payton Wilson. He's not going to start because Landon Roberts and Patrick Queen are the starters, but he's going to be rotating in a lot with this defense. What have you seen out of those two guys that could be encouraging that they're going to get more of a look, Brian?
Just the last thing I'll say on Fautanu before we move on is, again, not to be too pessimistic, but I think any hardcore analysis of him when he was picked, it would have been like, okay, there's a lot of reasons why it's going to work out and why it's a good selection. But just on the off chance that it doesn't, it's going to be for some of the issues we saw crop up his first time in stadium. So way too early to write the guy off, of course, but it does make me wonder about his ability to work his way into being a starter week one. Payton Wilson, I don't think going to be a starter week one, but I think he's going to be a key contributor from the jump. He's just, and to go back to what I said at the top of the segment about it being case by case, I think this draft class for the Steelers, I mean, I wrote about it at the time. It's so mature. It's so grizzled at the college level that, they won a lot. They produced a lot as a class. A lot of them fell to the spots that the Steelers got them because they're a little overaged or they had some injury history. But that stuff, while it hurts your draft stock, it helps you adjust to NFL life, I think. There's always the ceiling floor discussion, but I think a lot of these players, whether it's Payton Wilson or even, Beanie Bishop from the undrafted ranks, as the number one slot corner potentially, those guys should be able to hit the ground running more than most. And I think you are going to see them in there come the season opener in Atlanta. And Wilson, what will his role ultimately be? Tough to say before we see that trio of him, Landon Roberts, and Patrick Queen all healthy in a game. But he's going to be able to help you in sub packages at the very least.
I think that there's still a lot to consider there. And there's other guys who we know won't start, but I think we've seen them get included. Mason McCormick, being thrown in there. Ryan Watts. I think Ryan Watts is going to get a roster spot, but I want to save the Ryan Watts talk for the next segment because that plays into the secondary. Because I think everyone's really excited about Minkah Fitzpatrick, DeShon, Elliott, Joey Porter Jr., and Cory Trice, who's stepping up. We'll get into him a little bit. But how will this fully be comprised as far as fitting into the 53-man roster? We discuss that next with Brian here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They are your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. Call them today for a free consultation. This show is also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda deals today. Go to 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or go to their website, moonhonda.com. And here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history, the CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
Welcome back to the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko talking Steelers with you here. Brian, let's talk about this secondary. Like I was saying, we know who's at the top of this list. Joey Porter Jr., CB1, Donte Jackson, CB2, Minkah Fitzpatrick, DeShon Elliott, DeMonte
Minkah might not get cut.
There you go. He's not getting traded either to the 49ers, despite what anyone tweets on Twitter. So your top five there, right? And we've also seen the rise of Cory Trice in the absence of Donte Jackson, who's healing a minor, bumps and bruises injury right now. And Trice not only has been playing in place of Donte Jackson, but I think been looking good in camp. And so I think he's another lock for the roster. But where I think it starts to get to become a tougher question is, how much do you keep of both of those positions? Because I think typically you keep 4 safeties and then you tend to keep 5 or 6 corners, right? Because it's not just outside corners. You need slot corners as well. And sometimes you have Cam Sutton, who can double as the outside corner and the slot corner, and that can alleviate the need to keep 2 slot corners in case one goes down. But Brian, as you have it right now, where would you have 9 or 10 defensive backs, and where would you lean towards for each position?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they've got a lot of guys wearing different hats in there as far as, like a Thomas Graham is someone who's a long shot, but he can play inside and outside. So he's sort of on my radar. Cam Sutton's going to have the ability to do that plus safety, but we know he's out for the first 8 games of the regular season. Right. DeMonte Casey, he can sort of shift around when you go to that 3 safety package. DeShon Elliott as well. And Ryan Watts is someone who I think is playing his way onto the team. I wasn't sure coming into camp if the 6th rounder, the final pick of the 2024 draft class was a lock, but he's putting himself close to that designation for me. I mean, I watch him not just in 11-on-11 where he's made some plays, but when they go to those one-on-ones, don't get me wrong, he doesn't win them all. Those drills are very much in favor of the offense when you're trying to cover a guy straight up, very little help or no help. But there are times where, he gets a smaller receiver against him, and at his size, 6'2", 6'3", like he just erases that guy. So if his ball skills can sort of come around to NFL caliber, I think he's got a lot more potential than I gave him credit for when they took him out of Texas. So I think he's going to be in the mix. And I'm with you, Chris. Cory Trice to me is starting to separate a little from Darius Rush as that top backup outside guy. I think during OTAs and minicamp, I was flip-flopped on that because we just hadn't seen much of Trice. I thought Rush was doing a little bit to sort of put himself in good position, but maybe it might be an example of someone who was in pole position when the team reported to camp in Latrobe, but now Trice is charging hard. So he's in there for me. Beanie Bishop, it's a little bit curious what's going on there at the slot with him and Grayland Arnold, sort of taking turns each week as the number one guy. I wonder if both make it or if Beanie does enough that he will clearly be the guy there. I don't know that it would be the other way around, but don't sleep on Arnold. He played, I think, 24% of the defensive snaps last year for the Texans, who, in case you missed it, were the surprise team of the league, made the playoffs, and absolutely waxed the Steelers when they went head-to-head down in Houston.
Mm-hmm. I think that's certainly something to keep an eye on there. I feel like there's the whole idea that they could keep two slot corners there because, and also a part of keeping slot corners, you have to help on special teams. Like, you can't just be, at that position unless you're like a superstar slot corner, you better be helping on special teams. So, maybe that's how they squeeze it. But I think between, the question of which offensive linemen do they keep? Do they keep 5 interior and 4 offensive tackles? Okay. But then, how many receivers do they keep? How many tight ends do they keep? How many defensive linemen do they keep?
There's so many moving pieces, running backs. I mean,
yeah,
even quarterback. Like, I don't know if the Steelers fan podcast listening sphere is ready for this take, but I would only keep 2 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. But that's just me.
What is Kyle Allen giving you right now?
That's what I'm saying. Like in the NFL, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I believe the NFL changed the rule this year that your emergency third quarterback for game day can be a guy on your practice squad. So I don't think you're, losing that spot if you do that. So to me, it's sort of simple math to save yourself, a potential contributor. Whereas, you risk a Kyle Allen or John Rice Plumlee to waivers, but one of them was signed in like the second or third week of free agency, and the other guy was an undrafted free agent. So I'm not as worried about that. You've got Russell Wilson and Justin Fields who you feel good about. I would, if it were me in the GM chair, which shouldn't be and it never will be, but I would use that third quarterback spot on another receiver, another DB, another D lineman, something like that.
I'm here with you on that, especially because I think this team's going to need depth at those positions. Heck, this team needed depth at linebacker and safety last year with the problems it had with injuries. And not to say that it's going to happen anywhere or any position, but I think you should try to brace for that as much as possible in today's NFL. That's why the NFL should allow teams to expand their rosters in general to have the space to kind of protect themselves. But if you're the Steelers, I agree, cutting back from your third quarterback spot, especially when you trust your top 2 quarterbacks, I think as much as they do this year, I think that makes a lot of sense, so that maybe you can keep 2 slot corners and 5 safeties in this mix here. But the final training camp practice is today, Wednesday, August 14th. So we will be there on hand, covering from Latrobe, and then Thursday is the private practice where they have their scrimmage with the Buffalo Bills before their Saturday game with the Buffalo Bills at Acrisure Stadium. Covering all of that will be our guys, our team, including Brian and myself and Jerry and Ray. All that stuff here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast from the Post-Gazette. Read all our written work at post-gazette.com. Find this show and all of our content on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast and the daily content from the Post-Gazette. We'll see you here tomorrow for the final report from Latrobe after practice. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.